Kevin Costner built empires on screen, but could not keep a single home intact. The man who protected Whitney Houston in The Bodyguard watched 2 marriages collapse in courtrooms. The director who made audiences believe in Field of Dreams saw $80 million walk out the door with his first wife, then watched history repeat itself 3 decades later. 7 children, 3 women, 2 devastating divorces, and a fortune spent trying to build the one thing fame could never buy him. At 70 years old, the icon who taught Hollywood how to dream is still searching for something he lost long before the world ever knew his name. But the real tragedy is not the money or the headlines. It is what happened to the boy who never stopped moving, and the man who never learned how to stay. His story begins in a rented house in California with a brother he never got to meet. It is heartbreaking to imagine that the man whose quiet strength would one day move millions began his life surrounded by grief he could not name. Kevin Michael Costner was born on January 18, 1955, in Linwood, California, the youngest son of William Costner, a ditch digger who would rise to become a power line technician, and Sharon Ray, a social worker whose gentle hands carried the weight of strangers' sorrows every single day. Their home was modest, the furniture worn, the walls thin enough to let winter creep through, uninvited. But love lived there, unspoken and steady, holding the family together even when everything else threatened to fall apart. 2 years before Kevin drew his first breath, tragedy had already reshaped the Costner family. His brother Mark Douglas lived for only a single day before his tiny heart stopped beating. It was the kind of quiet loss that changes everything without anyone ever speaking of it aloud. From that moment forward, love in that household became something fierce and guarded. Bill grew stricter, determined to protect his remaining sons from a world he could no longer trust. Sharon grew quieter, folding her grief into long glances and careful gestures. Sometimes Kevin would catch her standing still in the kitchen, eyes fixed on an empty corner as if watching a ghost only she could see. His father would fall silent in those moments, rough hands gripping the table like he was trying to hold the family together by sheer will. That absence hung in the air like a shadow, and perhaps it was there, in that wordless grief, that Kevin first learned what pain sounds like when it chooses silence instead of tears. By the time he turned 12, he had packed his life into more boxes than most adults ever will. The Costners moved constantly, chasing work that always seemed one town away: Compton, Ventura, Visalia, Orange County. Each relocation brought new schools, new faces, and new goodbyes that came before he ever learned how to belong. The sound of packing tape became the soundtrack of his childhood. He was never the loud kid, never the star athlete, never the one teachers remembered at the end of the year. He was the quiet boy at the back of the classroom who wrote poems instead of answers and whispered goodbye to towns that never knew he existed. One night, as another moving truck pulled away, Kevin sat in the back seat, watching streetlights flicker past like memories he was not allowed to keep. He did not cry. He simply learned to let go before anything had a chance to hold on. But something unshakable took root in that quiet ache, a belief that even if the world refused to see him, he could still build something that would last. By high school, a late growth spurt finally brought him to 6 feet. Yet the real growth happened within. In church choirs, his voice trembled with longing. At night, he wrote poems about wide-open skies and second chances. He dreamed of places where the ground did not shift beneath his feet, and stories that would never have to be packed into boxes. His father's discipline became his compass. His mother's faith became his foundation. Every goodbye had carved strength into him. Every silence had taught him to listen deeper. He had learned early that life does not owe you comfort. It only offers chances to begin again. And from those chances, Kevin Costner would build the courage to chase a dream that terrified him. A dream that would cost him everything he thought he wanted and give him everything he never expected to lose. What does a dream cost when you are 23, with a new wife, no money, and a heart too restless to settle? For Kevin Costner, the price was everything. Safety, certainty, the quiet pride of a young man who did not want to disappoint the people who loved him. In 1978, fresh out of California State University Fullerton with a degree in marketing, he did what every good son was supposed to do. He found a steady job. Each morning he buttoned his shirt, smiled for the world, and felt a small piece of himself disappear behind a desk. The paycheck was reliable. The future was predictable, but the silence inside him was deafening. His heart was not in numbers. It lived in stories, in invisible worlds that no one else could see. Somewhere between the fluorescent lights and the hum of typewriters, he began to realize that safety was a slow kind of death. Then fate intervened, wearing the face of Richard Burton. It was an ordinary flight home from his honeymoon. Ordinary until Kevin looked to his right and saw one of the greatest actors in the world sitting beside him. The air between them felt charged, as if destiny itself had taken a seat. Nervously, he confessed a secret that had been burning inside him for years. He wanted to act, but he was terrified to try. Burton studied him for a long moment, then offered a simple reassurance that Kevin would carry for the rest of his life. When the plane landed and Burton's limousine pulled away, the legendary actor leaned out the window and wished him good luck. Those two words cracked something open that would never close again. Within weeks, Kevin quit his job. Within months, he was scrubbing boats, driving trucks, and giving tours of movie stars' homes while barely able to afford rent. He walked miles to save bus fare. He slept in his clothes when the heat failed. He auditioned endlessly, rejected constantly, invisible once more. His first role came in a forgettable film that embarrassed him for years. He landed a part in The Big Chill, only to watch every scene get cut from the final release. He sat in that premiere alone, knowing no one would ever know he had been there. For 6 brutal years, Hollywood treated him like he did not exist. But the boy who had spent his childhood starting over knew how to survive. In 1985, Lawrence Kasdan, the same director who had once cut him from a film, offered Kevin a role in Silverado. When the cameras rolled, something shifted. Audiences noticed. Hollywood noticed. The door that had never opened finally cracked wide. The Untouchables in 1987 made him a star. Bull Durham in 1988 made him beloved. Field of Dreams in 1989 made him immortal. And then came the gamble that would define his entire career. In 1990, Kevin mortgaged his own money to direct and star in Dances with Wolves, a 3-hour Western spoken partly in Lakota that every studio executive called career suicide. Storms destroyed sets. The budget spiraled. The press nicknamed it Kevin's Gate and predicted disaster. Instead, the film earned $424 million and 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. The boy from Linwood, who had never belonged anywhere, had just made history. But success always demands payment. And Kevin Costner was about to learn exactly how much glory can take from a man who has everything except the one thing he always wanted. Fame arrived like a flood, and it drowned the life Kevin Costner had built before anyone knew his name. By the early 90s, he was everywhere. Magazine covers, red carpets, film sets that demanded 16-hour days. Robin Hood earned $390 million, despite critics mocking his accent. The Bodyguard became a cultural phenomenon, earning over $400 million and a soundtrack that sold 50 million copies. He was commanding $10 to $20 million per film. one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood, a man who seemed to hold the entire industry in his hands. But the hands that held Oscars could not hold his marriage together. Cindy Silver had believed in him before anyone else. She had stood beside him when there was nothing to stand beside except hope. She had waited through the cold apartments and the failed auditions and the years when the dream gave nothing back. Together, they had built a family, welcoming Annie in 1984, Lily in 1986, and Joe in 1988. There were picnics in the California sun, birthday candles blown out around kitchen tables, bedtime stories told in a voice the world had not yet learned to recognize. For a while, love was enough to hold everything together, but each film pulled Kevin further from home. Each premiere meant another flight, another hotel room, another week where his children's voices came through a telephone instead of across a dinner table. Cindy raised 3 kids in quiet rooms while her husband smiled for cameras on distant red carpets. She watched him become one of the most famous men in the world while reading about him in magazines she never bought. The man who once came home smelling of paint and ambition now carried the scent of distant cities and studio lights. Trust did not break in a single moment. It faded slowly, like light at dusk. The whispers of late nights and on-set closeness spread through tabloids. Nothing proven, everything poisoned. They tried counseling, they tried distance, they tried remembering who they had been before fame rewrote the rules of their life. But some fractures run too deep for memory to mend. In 1994, after 16 years of marriage, they divorced. There had been no prenuptial agreement, only trust. The settlement reportedly reached $80 million, one of the most expensive divorces in Hollywood history. But Kevin would later admit the real cost was not money. It was watching his children split between 2 homes, seeing them only half as much, and knowing that even the greatest achievements on screen could not repair what distance had broken. The night the papers were signed, he packed boxes labeled with words that used to mean something: family, home, forever. Outside, flashbulbs popped like distant thunder. Inside, the silence was deafening. The fall came swiftly after. Waterworld in 1995 was supposed to cement his legacy. Instead, it nearly destroyed him. Hurricanes obliterated sets. Budgets exploded to $235 million. Kevin almost drowned during one scene, tied to a mast as waves crashed over him, pulled from the water at the last moment by crew members who feared they had lost him. The press tore him apart, dubbing it Kevin's Gate before the film even opened. When The Postman followed in 1997 and swept the Razzie Awards for Worst Picture and Worst Actor, the same industry that had crowned him turned its back completely. Scripts stopped arriving. The phone fell silent. For the first time in years, Kevin Costner faced the kind of invisibility he had known as a child. But the boy who had learned to pack his life into boxes understood something Hollywood never would. He knew how to start over. After the wreckage of his first marriage and the humiliation of public failure, Kevin retreated into work, convinced that motion could numb the loss. Then slowly, love found him again. In 1996, a brief relationship with Bridget Rooney resulted in the birth of his son Liam. Kevin was hesitant at first, uncertain of his ability to be a good father through another complicated situation. But when the truth was confirmed, he stepped forward immediately, establishing support and ensuring his son would never feel like an outsider. The relationship did not last, but it ended without bitterness, and Liam grew up knowing his father had kept his word. Then came Christine Baumgartner. They met in 1998, drifted apart in 2002 when she wanted children, and Kevin feared beginning again, and found their way back when he realized he could not imagine his life without her. In September 2004, they married on his Aspen ranch beneath the Colorado sky. She arrived in a horse-drawn carriage. He waited beneath a canopy of light, eyes wet, whispering to a friend that he never thought he would get this chance again. For nearly 19 years, they built what looked like paradise. 3 children, Caden, Hayes, and Grace, turned the ranch into a fairy tale. There were snow forts in winter, beach days in Santa Barbara, movie nights with popcorn scattered across the floor. For the first time in decades, Kevin was not playing a hero. He was living like one. But paradise does not burn. It erodes. By the early 2020s, work had crept back into the spaces love once filled. Yellowstone demanded months on location. Horizon consumed his savings, his time, and eventually his peace. Christine held the household together while feeling invisible inside a life the world envied. She wanted presence. He offered stability, and love, starved of attention, began to thin into silence. In May 2023, she filed for divorce. What followed was not a quiet unraveling, but a public spectacle. Battles over child support and property and custody that played out in headlines for months. She was ordered to leave their Santa Barbara home under the terms of a prenuptial agreement that suddenly felt colder than glass. Then came photographs of Christine with a man Kevin had once considered a friend, images that turned heartbreak into something sharper. He admitted to friends that he still loved her, but some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. For the second time, Kevin Costner watched a family he had built collapse in courtrooms. 7 children, 3 mothers, 2 devastating divorces, and still, beneath the ruins, the same stubborn hope that had carried him since childhood. The hope that maybe this time, starting over, would finally lead somewhere he could stay. At 70 years old, Kevin Costner has lost more than most people will ever have. Yet he remains standing, not at the top of the mountain, but somewhere beyond it, where the view is quieter and the air is thin. Open Range in 2003 reminded audiences of the man they once admired. Yellowstone in 2018 reminded them why they had never forgotten. As John Dutton, the weathered patriarch, fighting to protect what could not be replaced, Kevin embodied a character that felt painfully close to his own life. The show became cable television's most-watched drama, drawing 16 million viewers and earning him over $1 million per episode. At 63, he experienced a resurrection few actors ever see, but numbers were never his measure. Purpose was. The dream that refused to die was Horizon, a sprawling Western epic he had carried since 1988. He poured $38 million of his own money into the project, mortgaged his home, and cast his son Hayes beside him. When the first chapter premiered at Cannes in 2024, critics divided and box office returns fell short of the investment. Kevin smiled anyway. He was not chasing approval. He was keeping a promise to himself. The losses along the way have been heavier than any audience could see. His parents passed within years of each other, taking with them the foundation that had held him steady since childhood. Whitney Houston's death in 2012 cut deeper than most realized. He had believed in her when the industry doubted, protected her on the set of The Bodyguard, and built a friendship rooted in trust. At her funeral, his voice broke as he told the world she had always been enough. The words he spoke that day still echo, a quiet tribute to a woman who deserved more time than life allowed. At 70, his body carries the cost of decades spent chasing truth on film. The back aches from falls on horseback. The knees argue with every cold morning. The hands tremble slightly when the mountain wind cuts through aspen. But he still wakes before dawn, still walks the ranch, still writes, directs, and dreams. His legacy is not measured in awards or box office receipts. It lives in 7 children scattered across the decades, each one carrying a piece of his journey. Annie followed him into filmmaking. Lily inherited his love of music. Hayes rides beside him on set, learning the craft his father nearly abandoned before it ever began. Kevin Costner once admitted that family is not a chapter, but the whole book. He is still writing his. The boy from Linwood, who packed his life into boxes, finally built something he does not have to leave behind. Not the ranch, not the fortune, but the proof that a man can break, rebuild, and still stand tall when the sun goes down. His story is not a tragedy. It is a testament that hardship is not the opposite of grace, but its gateway, that dreams are not built from comfort, but from endurance, and that sometimes the ones who fall the farthest are the ones who rise the highest. At 70, Kevin Costner is still here, still riding, still believing that somewhere beyond the next horizon there is a place worth reaching.